Worldwide, cardiovascular disease affects the lives of hundreds of millions. Dedicated cardio nerds everywhere are working hard to fight this global epidemic. These are their stories.
Welcome back, Cardio Nerds. Dan Ambinder here. Thanks again for joining us for the Braunwald Chronicles as we learn about pivotal moments in the history of cardiology from the legendary Dr. Eugene Braunwald. In the last episode, we covered Chapter 2, the Camelot years, myocardial oxygen consumption, and the transseptal approach, which really revolutionized transcatheter diagnostics and interventions. Now join us for Chapter 3, where Dr. Braunwald discusses his experiences with the natural history of untreated aortic stenosis, beta blockers in heart failure, and seizing the moment. This is a great one. As we take in this breathtaking series, please remember that CardioNerds is an independent fellow-founded platform with the goal to democratize cardiovascular education. You can support the mission by subscribing to and rating the show, donating via Patreon, getting CardioNerd swag on Teespring, and sharing your love for cardiology on social media. This podcast is not meant to be used for medical advice, and the views expressed here do not necessarily reflect the opinions or policies of our employers. Dr. Braunwald, as Cardio Nerds, we're particularly excited to ask you this next question because our very first episode was aortic stenosis and very much based on your work. And in Thomas Lee's book, he describes a moment when Dr. Glenn Morrow was at a Friday afternoon cath conference discussing a patient with severe aortic regurgitation.
Yeah.
Context, the first aortic valve replacement had only occurred just a few years prior. And he asked you, how would this patient be doing in 5 years? And you admitted...
If we don't operate.
If we don't operate, right.
Yeah.
That's right. And you admitted that you did not know the answer to that. How did this moment influence your research, including defining the natural history of aortic stenosis that has become the bedrock of all medical students everywhere?
Well, so, a lot of people have asked me, who was your major mentor in your professional life? And it was Glenn Morrow, a cardiac surgeon. Imagine a surgeon being a mentor to a future professor of medicine. How could that be? So he was 6 years older than I was and trained at Hopkins for his residency. And I think that he entered the public health service because I think they paid for his tuition when he went to medical school. As I told you, I sort of accelerated. And with his blessing, I became chief of cardiology. And we were then equal. Even though he was my mentor and older, I was the chief of cardiology. He was the chief of cardiac surgery. We came together at cath conference every Friday. Also had other meetings, but anyway. We had this young man in his 20s with wide open aortic regurg, blood pressure like 160/20, really pounding all of the signs of that we know and love about wide open AI. But he was asymptomatic. And as you point out, valve replacement, there was no good valve at that point. At that moment, there were valves, and you could replace the valve. But the outlook, it was before the star valve came. And they were made of material, and they deteriorated after a couple of years. So it was a major deal. And therefore, his question is, if we leave him alone, he's asymptomatic, what's going to happen? Is he going to die? Or should we take a chance and risk it and so forth? And I said, I don't know. And so this, in a fairly large conference, he says, you medical guys, no, he called us mopes. He says, you medical mopes aren't good for very much. He said, you can't fix it, and you can't even tell me what's going to happen. And I took that back, and I thought about it. And, all that we were doing was observing patients in the acute stage of their illness. They'd come to the NIH for evaluation, and then they were either operated on or not. If they were operated on, they would come back. If they were not, they would be sent back to their physicians. And you sort of lose them. And at that time, interestingly, natural history wasn't something that many people thought about. It was episodic. And when a treatment comes along, when a new therapy occurs, that's when people begin to think natural history, because that question came up. So again, John Ross and I decided that we were going to look at all the patients with AS whom we had seen since the opening of that hospital, and also going forward, patients with AS, and look at their natural history. And it was as a result of that one case that served as the stimulus to say, hey, wait a minute, we're missing the boat here. So that again falls into the category of a lot of luck, being at the right place at the right time with the right people. The right people, there were two right people in this. There was John Ross and there was Glenn Morrow, and so on. Now, you have to say, okay, I was lucky enough to be able to put this together. And I think that's what happened with Transeptal.
Yeah, Dr. Braunwald, that story that you just told, and you keep repeating it again and again, right place, right time, right people, and a whole lot of luck. Reading Thomas Lee's book and some of your interviews, that keeps coming across, but I just can't believe how much luck. And that kind of gets to...
Well, I mean, I'm not modest. And I think that I was able to seize the moment and seize the situation. But that's not always the case. I mean, I can tell you things that as I look back, that I missed in a large way. Let me give you an example of something that bothers me. So around 1962, I became interested from the work done in the Sarnoff laboratory about neurohumoral control of the heart. And when I think about neurohumoral control at that time, I'm thinking adrenergic nervous system. And when you think adrenergic nervous system, you think about norepinephrine. So, piece of luck. Our lab, chemistry lab that we had in cardiology, we had a bank of laboratories. The chemistry lab we had is next to the chemistry laboratory of a distinguished pharmacologist called Julius Axelrod. Julius Axelrod also won the Nobel Prize. So he's not a small figure. He was small in size, but he was a big, big intellect. And he was measuring norepinephrine all the time. And so because he was next door and I would hear, see, the beauty of the NIH is the kind of contacts of people that you have there, and people that you see on the elevator, people that you see in the dining room. So Axelrod is measuring norepinephrine, and I'm thinking about neurohormonal control. So I asked him, Julie, I said, could your technician teach my technician, Martha, how to measure norepi? He said, of course. And a week later, we're measuring norepinephrine, measuring it in heart failure. It's elevated in heart failure. It rises with exercise to abnormal level. We do a whole bunch of normal controls. Norepi is lower, and with exercise, doesn't change very much. Then we measure norepi in a 24-hour urine excretion to see whether this exercise is brief and so forth, what happens over the day. And we classified patients by New York Heart Class. And boy, the thing goes up. So we have the first neurohumoral control of the circulation. And we measure the norepi in the heart. We get specimens of atrium that Glenn Morrow gives us from his surgery. And we measure the norepinephrine there. It's depleted in the heart because of the constant barrage the sympathetic nervous system. 2 or 3 years later, I forget the exact timing, I'm at a conference in London, and I meet a gentleman, a professor, James Black, who described the first beta blocker. Now, in a different part of my life, different direction, different lab, we had discovered hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. And by accident, we have found that a positive inotrope increases contractility. So I hear James Black describing his work with a beta adrenergic blocker. By the way, James Black won the Nobel Prize for the beta blocker. So we're talking Nobel Prizes is coming out your ears by now. So he gave me a vial of pronetolol, which was the parent of propranolol. And I put it in my pocket. And if I were to say how it came into the United States, I might be arrested. Anyway, we took this and gave it to a patient with hypertrophic subaortic stenosis, with hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. We called it at that time IHSS, and now it's HCM, which is a better name. And the gradient was reduced, and as you know, it has become significant, although not terrific, in therapy. It is used, of course, now there's a new drug, mavacamten, that has appeared just in the past year, and I serve on the scientific advisory board of a company, that Myocardia, that makes this. Anyhow, so we come back and we start our patients on beta blockade. And we did some controls, we did exercise and so forth, and it gradually gets accepted as a pretty good drug. You don't have anything else. This is before calcium antagonists, and they're not any better anyway. So, but what did I miss? I struck out on not using it in patients with heart failure. I mean, as I think about it, everything was there. I'm studying heart failure. I have defined the importance of the adrenergic nervous system in heart failure. I have a vial of beta blockade in here. I'm using it, but I'm using it on a sort of small time group, HCM, not heart failure. We could have had a whole heart failure story. It was done by a group in Gothenburg, Sweden, and obviously has changed the treatment of heart failure. So, it's not always been right. I think about this one a lot between 3 a.m. and 4 a.m.
Dr. Braunwald, I'd like to take you back to what you just mentioned there, another part of your life and another lab. You mentioned the HCM story, and all our listeners and all of us here would love to hear that.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us for Chapter 3. Be sure to tune in for Chapter 4, where Dr. Braunwald will tell us about a royal screw-up and the discovery of hypertrophic cardiomyopathy.